Hello, and welcome to Not Safe for Racists, a podcast designed to address diversity, equity, and inclusion, candidly and without judgment. Our goal is to have open and honest conversations about current issues and how we can work together to improve our social, learning, and work environments. My name is Janella Bella, Principal Consultant at Diverse Solutions Strategy Firm, and your host. Today I'm joined by Justin Velten, award-winning social interaction scholar, professor, author, and speaker, CEO of Go Culture International. Thank you for chatting with me today, Justin. Welcome to the show, and I look forward to learning with you today. I would like to acknowledge the land on which we learn upon today. We acknowledge that the land we are on was originally inhabited by Indigenous peoples. My territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape people. I acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy peoples, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi in my region of Ontario, and the Caddo Nation in Justin's region of Texas. So welcome today, Justin, and thank you so much for chatting with me. I'm very eager to get into it. It's a very politically and racially tense time, especially in the U.S. So it is a great time to have these types of conversations.
Yeah, Janelle, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's given the political climate right now, it's as if we're discussing whether we should use the atomic bomb, but yet the bomb has just gone off. So should we? It's kind of right in the middle of things.
Yeah, it's very much. We're trying to be reactive now, even in a sense where we're still being proactive. It's very difficult because these next few weeks in North America are going to be very trying, but also we have no clue what's up.
Yeah, absolutely. So many moving pieces. We're glad, just like you are, to if any of us can have a moment, be able to take a role at some level and speak into what's going on and provide some sort of guidance. We're honored to be able to do that.
What do you find the current climate in Texas is? I know, speaking to other people in the region, Texas is a lot more diverse than people seem to think. And I was just kind of curious to see how you are seeing it in your region around you.
Yeah, I'm sure that any answer I can give to that is somebody else could look at it and say, well, I see it differently. And so just from my take on things, Texas is a very diverse place, but interestingly, right now, when people hear the word diversity, I think especially, of course, in North America, they're thinking white-black relations, and it's so much. There's so much more to it than that. Definitely that relationship is very important, but there are so many more relationships as well. And so in Texas, for an example, the Hispanic relationship with Texan, the typical people who have been born and raised here in Texas, versus people who have been maybe come across the border at some point. It is that relationship, interestingly, is by and large positive. Now, I'm sure there are negative pieces to that. I don't want to speak out of school on that, but there are definitely, I think, strides have been made here in Texas for those groups to work well together. I'm not a native Texan, and so lived different places before and been around the world. Texas has a relatively stable economy in the way that they do these things. Imperfect for sure, but definitely a bit stabilized.
So where are you from originally, or has it always been the U.S. or other countries as well?
Yeah, so traveled a good bit, but just as far as living and residence, I was born and raised in the Midwest in the U.S. And so I was born and raised in a place where, there was not much diversity at all, really. And then when I was later in life, lived in places where diversity existed, but it wasn't welcome. For example, some parts of the Deep South where where race relations have made, in certain ways, great progress, and in certain ways are about 50 years back from where the rest of the country is. And so I've seen that. So living in Texas seems like this kind of um, culture where groups have learned to kind of work together, uh, instead of saying, "Hey, this group over here," always pointing a finger, which I've seen other places.
Yeah, I grew up in North Carolina. So a very drastic difference in terms of demographic, but also the response to demographic. And I'm not sure if maybe it was the region I was in or the specific county, but I do feel like, or maybe it was that we've changed, but I do feel we've segregated more now with the polarization of racial tensions. People have become more polarized in who they associate with or how they're associating with these terms. And from what I recall, and again, I could be because I was younger, in I felt so welcomed and so connected. And I did have those experiences growing up in the States with um, racism and marginalization, but that can be anywhere. But I do find that there was a difference in the welcomingness of culture in the US in general, rather than maybe not so much necessarily in the region I'm in now. So who
Yeah.
knows? There's lots of factors probably that fit into that.
Yeah, and I know you don't want to chase down this rabbit hole too far, Janelle, but I will say one comment is that, human beings, we have this tendency, we're going to gravitate toward people who are similar to us, in certain ways. And that's a human instinct. It's not necessarily innately a bad thing. We sometimes build community quickly and find, if we're, let's say we move abroad, and we're looking for a community where we feel safe and welcome. Well, typically Americans are going to find a group of Americans, right? And they're going to latch on to that, and they feel like a sense of home and safety and consistency there. It doesn't mean they should stay there. They should branch out, but that gives them kind of an immediate sense of community. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a natural tendency. And the challenge is then to take that next step, and to step outside that, begin stretching yourself. I've had over the years, especially ministers who have come to me of churches and said, "Hey, we want a more diverse, group at our church. How do we do that?" And first of all, I always just say, "Hey, take a deep breath, relax." That people are exercising a natural tendency. They gravitate toward people and styles, and even more like worship styles are similar for different groups of people, and so they just gravitate to that. So first of all, don't beat yourself up that there's not a lot of diversity in your church. That's step one. Step two, let's talk about, maybe how to make these things happen. But it's just a natural tendency, I think, for people to gravitate toward similarity.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. And I think with the last year, with the transitions with COVID and people starting to move away from those normal social circles, they're becoming exposed to different perspectives and different groups, whether they're connecting online or they're just finding similarities with other people. And that's creating those connections that otherwise wouldn't be there in that normal interaction, whether it's the workplace or their community groups where they would normally meet and gather.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right. And there's another rabbit trail we could go down. I got a lot of thoughts rolling in my head, but I know you had some questions too to go over to today. So if I'm not careful, I'll just keep talking about other things.
We'll have a whole season just focused on the rabbit hole of thoughts we could get into, I'm sure. So I did want to ask, and this is a question I like to ask everyone because
Yeah.
everyone has their own unique reasoning, but what promoted you to get into equity work and what fuels you and drives you to stay in this type of work?
Hmm. Yeah. So, it's difficult to pinpoint a moment or one single reason. You can look at somebody. You can look at me. I'm a white male. And that's somebody who I think gives a lot of people in the DEI space pause at times. I think, what does he know? What does he, what's the experience and things? And I'll be the first to tell you, I don't know everything. My wife would be the first to tell you that. I would be the second to tell you that. And so, uh, but with that on the table now, we have, what we have developed, for me, kind of started. I noticed early on in life, had this really deep passion for, and really felt passion for individuals who didn't fit a certain mold that was quote unquote socially acceptable or workplace acceptable or whatever that phrase may be. And my heart really went out to folks in those areas. I've uh, if I have, I'm sure I've benefited in some way, in many ways, from what being a white male in the U.S. And so I want to acknowledge that. And there are a lot of people who have been greatly disadvantaged because of, whether it be a health ability, whether it be the color of their skin, the way they speak, whatever these things are, they've been disadvantaged. And so my heart's always gone out to those folks, thinking, what can I do? Because I think a lot of people think, well, one of these days I'll grow up, I'll make a lot of money, and I'll give money to organizations that can do something about whatever that is. But I think there's also this, we all have time, we all have this ability to do something about it in whatever small or large ways. And so, when I was in college, I began really falling in love with this communication, interpersonal, intercultural communication concepts, and how we engage with others, and how we do that well versus how we do that not so well. And then in graduate school, I latched on with a guy by the name of Carly Dodd, who was one of the top intercultural scholars for a couple of decades. He's in his 80s now. He taught for about 47 years. And he was in the process of developing some programming around better understanding human interaction cross-culturally, and why some people do that well and some people don't do it very well, and then how can we evaluate and predict and better understand and train people in those things. And I jumped in both feet, with that work. And it really provided me an opportunity to, though I didn't have much money to give to organizations who were doing things about stuff like this, I could actively participate in developing something that could, in the long term, have a really incredible impact in the workplace, in schools, and those types of areas. So it's been a journey for me. I wish, it's not really just a short answer to that question, but that it's been a process, and in that, a lot of investment of time and resources to be able to bring to people a resource to really make a difference.
Wonderful. And Justin, don't discredit yourself as a white male. There's so many conversations that I have where when someone is identified as a white male, they kind of step back and they're like, okay, I don't have a voice in this, but I would like to give those who deserve a voice in this a platform. And I am so curious to this, because I think that the voice we do need to hear is of that white male, because it provides an opportunity to understand why things still remain the same, or why these thoughts haven't been developed and worked through. And if we just continue to say, this is what you need to think, and stop focusing on why people think the way they do, then we're not really progressing. So don't discredit your voice. We like to hear, and I don't speak we as in everyone. I like to hear your perspective and why you think those things, and work through it, because it's always a challenge to get into someone else's head, and especially when you hold such a valuable role in transitioning to a better society, a more productive society. very, very valuable information. So thank you.
Thank you.
And the work you do is incredible. And what Go Culture International does is a combination of where we're moving in the future. It's a socially productive program, but it also ties in with digital education, which is insane because that's exactly where we're moving. And I don't know if you would like to take some time to explain exactly what Go Culture
Yeah.
is, just so that there's a little better understanding here.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. So yeah, what Go Culture does is, it is a program that is based on those years of research I was telling you about. So I jumped in, like I said, in about 2005, it's about 15 years ago, with Carly Dodd, and was really it was really a partnership. The two of us, we were working, doing studies over and over and over. I mean, this is nerdy stuff, Janelle. So we were, I was a college professor for 14, 15 years, somewhere in there, and Carly 47 years. But we worked together with thousands of people representing work in over 40 different countries, and we were looking at these human tendencies and aptitudes, and testing and retesting and training folks, and it was just this really fun experience. Didn't pay a dime, that it was about how do we find a solution, and then we began looking at, okay, this is making an impact. How do we impact more people then? And so that brought us to this kind of online education model that is so prominent today. So we were looking at this a few years back, before launching as a really kind of more well-known public offering as a product. And that is this idea of, consultants do great work, you do, and that I've done in the past. But the tough thing is that we only have so many hours in a day and hours in a week, and we cannot duplicate ourselves. So online education allows us the opportunity to duplicate ourselves. So what we're doing now is taking what we've learned about online education over the years in higher education as professors, pairing that with all the research we had done over the last 20 years in diversity, equity, inclusion, and that we're pairing those together. And that's important, not only because of that delivery method and what it brings to be able to reach more people with an impactful program, but really, Janelle, I, I'm a firm believer that diversity, equity, inclusion is more than talent acquisition demographic spread. How many people in this demographic group did we hire last quarter? That's a great place to start, and that's a great part of any diversity, equity, inclusion initiative or program at an organization. But it shouldn't stop there. I think for too long it has stopped there. To me, we view sexual harassment and sexual harassment training so important that we make sure every year every single employee is trained, certified. They've done this, like they have gone through, and we make sure that every single person, we don't just provide that for a board of directors or a C-suite and hope that information trickles all the way to everybody, right? You have 200,000 employees, we're going to train 10 people and hope that works. No, because that topic is so important, and we hold it as such important topic, and we want to get that right. We don't want to make mistakes. I mean, mistakes are going to happen. We want to try to avoid as many mistakes as we can. So we're going to make sure that everybody is equipped with the knowledge, the training to avoid those missteps and do better and better. Well, we firmly believe at Go Culture that DEI training should be done the exact same way. There's no reason why we should then take something that is equally, if not more important, diversity, equity, inclusion training, and say, well, we're only going to train the C-suite, only going to train the board members. We're done. No, actually, we need to make sure that every single year we're training every single employee, and we can do that now, right? Through online delivery methods, we can make that happen. That's a tangible It's a very tangible outcome that we can make sure that everybody has had the training, everybody is evaluated, everybody is certified, the entire organization, so that, like with sexual harassment, we're working from top to bottom within the organization to make sure that everybody's equipped to handle situations better. And before I ramble on about this, I would say I think that's especially important because of how we as a company view culture. We, Go Culture being the name of our company, we don't view corporate culture probably like a lot of other people view corporate culture. Corporate culture surveys and those types of things are highly valuable, but they're typically asking an employee, what's your perception about how the company does this? How do they handle this? You're asking about this kind of thing called a company, how they handle things. We believe as a company that actually culture is made up of all these people, right? In order to improve the culture of the organization, I need to understand where I'm really strong in certain areas and my aptitudes, my attitudes and behaviors around diversity, equity, inclusion, where I could use some improvement. And then how do I make those improvements? What are some skill sets? What are some things to put in practice? And so if I can do that for every single employee, well, then it reasons that we would have a much more healthy DEI framework and mindset for the entire organization, so that when we bring those people in this quarter who fit in that demographic mold, who give us diversity at our organization, we're not just throwing them into a tough situation, we're throwing them into an atmosphere, culture that is more ready because they have greater aptitude in diversity, equity, inclusion, attitudes, and behaviors.
Yeah, and that's how we're moving from counting diversity into valuing diversity. And we're actually working towards those inclusive practices that really models a beneficial workplace, that you're going to have that higher employee engagement, the decreased absenteeism, and all of those things that come with a stronger relationship between the people within the company or the organization. And right with sexual harassment training, it's the same thing with like health and safety. And you have all of these things. And as a teacher, I'm just thinking about all the PD we do every September, and you have everything that you have to go through and become certified annually, sometimes semi-annually, just to be in a classroom with these students, but then to not have any foundational knowledge of cultures, values, belief systems, and equitable treatment of these children. I can tell you, I know how to put an EpiPen in because I've taken it 700 times, but I don't know sometimes how to properly address a student. So it definitely is something that we need to move towards, and it needs to become mandatory. And that's not just in workplaces, that's literally everywhere, within schools, within education programs. And that the reality is, if we don't, then the ideologies and the perspective within our society is never going to change either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have an interesting opportunity in history, I believe, where we can actually begin changing a generation. When these kinds of movements, we'll call it, they've come and gone, kind of like a roller coaster, right, over the past number of years. I don't think it's going anywhere this time. And so what we then have is an opportunity to reach beyond traditional modeling. What we're doing at Go Culture is this word and phrase is so overused, but I'll use it anyway. And that's, disrupting the way that we think about diversity, equity, inclusion. Again, it's not what we talked about. It's about this. How do we get this stuff in the hands of and require it of people? And so we can do it in the workplace, but you're exactly right. And education is another area. As a fellow professor for a number of years, there was, plenty of opportunities. I had plenty of opportunities to mess things up in my interaction with students. But I think even going before that, imagine if when I was in third grade, I was already receiving some sort of training, some sort of education, whether it be awareness to begin with, and cartoons to show me some things, or whatever the case may be. All the way through the end of high school, if I would have had those resources, just think about who I would have been today. I would have been much more open-minded. I would be much more, fill in the blank. And so that's one of the things that we're pursuing as well. We're actually in the process right now of getting together with some strategic partners who will be able to help us make that dream, I believe, come true. And what we're calling kind of a K-12 change a generation initiative, to be able to provide programming like this that is age grade appropriate for every grade level, K through 12.
And see, I'm on the kind of the back end of that. Is I'm working on in-service and pre-service teacher professional development, which is potentially a little different because of our regions. And I know that, so our curriculum in Ontario is based on the Ministry of Education, so it's province-wide. And it, in some cases, doesn't leave a lot of leeway for educators in terms of content, or finances don't leave a lot of leeway for diversifying the material used in a classroom, or teachers are being taught from post-secondary institutions that have linear ideologies, and they aren't pursuing the diversity in content or curriculum that's being shared. And so a lot of students are then being taught in that same cyclical pattern where the information just isn't changing. And we have that sustained Euro dominance in our education system and in this larger social status quo, because that's just what's being perpetuated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right there. That presents, I believe, and I'm not always like this, positive thinker all the time, and so don't take it this way. But therein, I believe, lies an incredible opportunity. And I think you mentioned money. You mentioned, people kind of holding on to the strings of what can be taught, when it's taught, and those types of things. We're in an era where if you want to learn something, you look it up and you learn it, right? And so that is part of the beauty of what we're trying to bring, apart from providing training for organizations for better workplace type, or on DEI, but in this K-12 initiative is, there are, because of where we are and the opportunity that presents itself, we talk to organizations all the time who have set aside resources to be able to fund programs like this K-12 program. And so that is an exciting opportunity for us to be able to develop and provide at no cost training for these K-12 and hopefully in the future higher ed as well, programs, so that it can be adopted without being formally adopted and paid for by the school system. They can still utilize it, still maximize that without it being an official adoption.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're going to end up going, is teachers are going to start taking the initiative in educating themselves and developing their own practice. And then slowly, as it becomes more in demand, then we'll see larger systemic changes and institutions will kind of follow suit.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're gonna cut it short today.
Sure.
And I'm gonna have to leave a little poll in the podcast and ask people to bring you back on if they want to hear more of us going down the rabbit hole. So
if nobody says yes, don't tell me, okay?
the votes. No, we heard enough rambling. No, I'm sure they would love to hear more. So thank you for joining me today, Justin, and having this really meaningful and critical conversation. I enjoyed learning with you, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and perspectives with me and the listeners. Before we sign off, and I should put a timer on this, do you have any final comments or thoughts that you wanted to add?
No, thank you. I appreciate it. It's been an honor to be here, and I do welcome questions or further things. My email address is justin@goculture.org if people have other questions. Happy to answer those.
Awesome. So thank you for joining me on Not Safe for Racists. More information about Go Culture International and Justin's work will be found in the links provided within this podcast, as well as additional information about the topics in our conversation today. Thank you for listening. I am your host, Janelle Bella. And remember, there's a difference between being racist and sounding racist, but there's no excuse for Don't forget to smash that thumbs up if you like what you heard today, and subscribe so you can be the first to know when new podcasts come out every week.